If you want to know how Pennywise lived on after the events of it, then stick around to the end of this video. Hello and welcome to Horror History. My name is Professor Nightmare States, also known as Shaggy, also known as Emo Abraham Lincoln, and in today's lesson we'll be discussing one of Stephen King's most iconic monsters, Pennywise, also known as it, also known as the Deadlights, also known as Robert Gray. Stephen King hasn't really gone on the record about his inspirations for it, causing some to believe that the events of the 1986 novel actually happened. On the other hand, actual intelligent people drew comparisons to a serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, a birthday clown in Chicago during the 1970s who did unspeakable things to more than 30 victims. He would later stash the kids in the crawlspace of his basement, not so different than Pennywise's penchant for dragging his victims' corpses into the sewers below Derry, Maine. Pennywise in the movies is depicted as one of the forms of a shape-shifting creature known as it, who has resided in a lair at the bottom Derry's sewage system for hundreds of years. But in the novel, it is much more than that, so let's travel back to the inception of it, over 1 billion years ago. Horror history. In the beginning there was an endless void known as the macroverse, which was inhabited only by a celestial force referred to as the Other. The Other created two additional inhabitants of the macroverse, one protector called Maturin the Turtle, and one shape-shifting entity called the Deadlights. The two would become natural enemies. The turtle was kind and all-knowing, but did not like to involve itself in any conflicts, and so, stayed hidden in its shell most often. At some point, the turtle came out of its shell with a stomach ache and vomited out our universe. Yeah, so everything you're sitting in right now? Yeah, that's actually puke. Everything you've eaten today? I think you get the idea. Speaking of which, its main form of sustenance is fear. I'll take him, I'll take all of you. And I'll feast on your flesh as I feed on your fear. Because of that fact, it traveled to our universe to look for food, much like how I may travel to Taco Bell when I'm done filming this. A couple thousand or possibly even million years ago, it discovered Earth. Earth was basically like a buffet for it, because humans have much more complex imaginations than any species it had discovered before. Specifically, the imaginations of human children were especially attractive to it, because they were capable of an unprecedented level of fear. It arrived on Earth as a fiery meteoric object that crashed into the land in North America that would one day become known as the Barrens in Derry, Maine. The impact scared away the animal inhabitants, such as antelope, fish, bats and others. The impact crater was devastating, but the area would be taken back by trees and wildlife over the years. The impact also sent it into a deep sleep, possibly aided by the fact that it became trapped in the Ice Age. In the year 1715, it would thaw out and arise from this slumber, thus marking the beginning of the cycle that would repeat roughly every 27 years, where it would awaken to feed on the fear of Derry's residents, not too different than how some mammals may eat and then go into hibernation during the winter. These incidents would often go unrecorded in Derry's history books, but that hasn't stopped locals from doing their own research. The earliest known victims of it were a party of 340 settlers called the Derry Company, named after the town in Ireland from which they hailed. They started to create a civilization along the Kenduskeag River, and Derry Township became a logging town. Still is, am I right, boys? In 1743, every single settler disappeared without trace or explanation. The entire camp? There were rumors of Indians, but no sign of an attack. The town was left deserted, other than one single house that burned down on the same spot where Georgie Denbrough would be killed 300 years later. I'm guessing all of these settlers were eaten by it, because she had taken such a long nap after crashing on Earth, and probably woke up especially hungry. Shortly after Derry Township was rediscovered, the town was re-established and the canal was built for easy access to the Kenduskeag River. It seems to be about this time that it starts experimenting with using the form of a clown. A picture from Will Hanlon's album dated to the 1700s shows a funny-looking man juggling bowling pins on the street near the canal. He wasn't wearing makeup, but did have the recognizable tufts of hair. The next known event is in 1851, which is 4 27-year cycles after the disappearance of the settlers. It targeted a man named John Markson, likely using the power of the Deadlights to possess him and do his bidding. It seems that humans who look directly into the Deadlights are put into a trance-like state where they can be controlled by it. John poisoned his entire family, then killed himself with a white nightshade mushroom. Keep in mind that having someone else do its bidding doesn't benefit it directly, but what it does do is instill fear into everyone involved, making them more delicious meals for Pennywise. It's basically the equivalent of putting those little sauce packets on your taco. In 1856, the clown's image appears in a political cartoon amongst some drunken loggers at a bar. This illustration seems to predict the next cycle, which begins in 1877, when 4 separate lynchings took place in town, and carries into 1879. Derry's logging business was really booming at that time, and a group of lumberjacks stumbled across another group, finding them completely hacked to pieces. Like a bear coming out of hibernation, it would continue to come out every 27 years or so to cause mayhem and feed on the fear of the residents of Derry. The next cycle was especially bloody. Coming up next, we'll go into the horrifying archives produced by it in the early 1900s. I had a ton of people participate in the last giveaway, and since you were all so excited about that one, why not just do another giveaway? This time, you'll float too, because the winner will be taking home this float. Merchandise. To enter, make sure you're following Nightmare States on Instagram and like this post. Winner will be chosen at random. Full rules can be found in the video description. In 1891, an ironworks is built in Derry by the Kitchener family, and an article about the opening of this facility is featured in the paper. The front page photograph shows a crowd gathering to celebrate the cutting of the ribbon, and off the left of the crowd, a clown can be seen celebrating with a handspring. This would be a precursor to one of Derry's deadliest events that took place at the end of this cycle. But first, there was a major incident that took place shortly after its reawakening in September of 1905. The logging business in Derry had become big enough that people started to organize unions. One of these organizers was named Claude Heroux. He and 3 colleagues were staying in a hotel in Derry, and during this stay, the colleagues turned up dead in the Kenduskeag River with missing body parts and the word "Union" pasted on each of their backs. It's unclear if this was the result of Pennywise's actions or if it was legitimately just unhappy workers, but Heroux, in an act of revenge, took an axe to a bar called the Silver Dollar and took out the loggers he thought were responsible. That night, the townspeople rioted. After Heroux's arrest, they dragged him out of his jail cell and lynched him on the side of town. One witness mentioned there was a guy there doing tricks and flips, who he assumed was new in town, but noted that he seemed to stick around after that. This highlights one of the major strengths of Pennywise. Other than fabulous gymnastics skills, it has the ability to divide people and turn them against each other. It would later attempt to use this tactic on the Losers Club after Eddie Kaspbrak suffers a broken arm, but their strong unity ends up working as an advantage to them. But before we get there, there's a lot more of Pennywise's history in Derry to cover. In 1906, an unexplained slew of animal mutilations takes place. These are most likely also connected to it. Now sometimes when you've just eaten tacos, you're a little hungry still, and you say, you know what, I'm gonna grab a big burrito, maybe some nachos and a large soft drink for the road. And that's basically what Pennywise did before going back into hibernation. On Easter of 1906, the previously mentioned ironworks held an Easter egg hunt for all the kids in Derry, during which the place exploded, leaving 102 dead, 88 of which were children. At this point, it's very clear that A. There's a problem plaguing Derry, and B. It's occurring on a 27-year cycle, although only a select number of Derry historians are aware of it because Pennywise has actively used its power to ensure that these disasters stay out of the news. The disasters that took place from there on out were largely ignored by the older townspeople, who were starting to become despondent, and preferred to ignore the problems rather than acknowledge them. It starts to feel like Derry is just cursed with random acts of violence, but there's no doubt that it is behind them. In 1929, a huge group of citizens gunned down the notorious Bradley gang, and several witnesses were said to have seen a clown participate in the brutal shooting. Probably looked like something out of The Dark Knight, minus the school bus. Each of the witnesses to the Bradley gang execution claimed the clown had the same gun as their own, though none of them shared the same gun. In 1930, was the first confirmed sighting of one of the other recurring forms of it. The giant bird that would later attack Michael Hanlon was first spotted 28 years beforehand by his father Will Hanlon. This happened the night of the horrible attack on the Black Spot nightclub, in which a racist organization called the Legion of White Decency burned down the popular African-American-run jazz joint, and the place collapsed before dozens of people had the chance to escape. Just after narrowly making it out, Will looked up and saw a giant bird with red balloons tied to its wings, a detail he kept to himself until he was on his deathbed. From here on, Will knew that Derry was no ordinary town, but he would never fully understand that it was responsible like his son would one day find out. The following year, one of the worst floods in town history occurred. This flood was almost as bad as the flood that occurred in my comment section that one time when I had the wrinkly shirt, and this flood uncoincidentally took place during one of Pennywise's waking years. Stephen King doesn't specifically note when the sewer system that runs under Derry was built, but there's a good chance, based on when certain laws went into effect in real life, that it was around the time of this big flood in the book. While these systems may have been implemented to keep water levels from overflowing to prevent another disastrous flood, they would inadvertently become the home of Pennywise, who built his lair deep within the sewers under Derry. From this point forward, future sightings of Pennywise the dancing clown are all connected to the drain system, whether it be a creepy voice echoing from a drain, a glowing yellow pair of eyes emanating in a sewer grate, or a mysterious red balloon floating around in a runoff pipe. There's been another murder. Little Velma Daniels. Velma Daniels? Her poor body was found this morning down by the canal. So if you come down here to play, come together like you are now, understand? Another image in Will Hanlon's photo album shows the celebration at Wally's Spa in 1933 when the U.S. alcohol prohibition ends. The group photo contains many men holding up beer mugs, and Pennywise drinking champagne from a high-heeled shoe in the corner. Pennywise continues to make appearances throughout Derry's history. For example, in 1945, when Japan surrendered to end World War II, a parade is held in Derry to celebrate, and in one photograph, the clown can be seen dancing in the background. In the 50s, Pennywise would bring this same photo to life to terrorize the Losers Club, but that is just one of the many events that took place after the tragic incident involving Georgie Denbrough in 1957. Coming up, we'll be analyzing one of the darkest cycles of its history in Derry, and the reasons behind this particular spree being cut short. It was a rainy October day in 1957. Naturally, as a 6-year-old boy, Georgie Denbrough wanted to go out and play in it. He suited up in his yellow rain jacket and asked his big brother Bill to make him a paper boat. There you go. The boat was pushed along the gutter in the Derry Public Works drain system, which was managed by his father, Zach Denbrough. The boat began to pick up speed, and not wanting to lose it, little Georgie raced after, not knowing that he was rushing into his own watery tomb. He was unable to grab his boat before it was washed into the sewer grate, where a man in clown makeup introduced himself as Mr. Robert Gray, otherwise known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise did not immediately become aggressive, first befriending Georgie and tempting him to reach into the grate and get his boat. This is the very reason that the shapeshifting it so often opted to use the clown form, Pennywise, because most children love clowns, or at least they did back then before these came out. Today he would probably take the form of some Fortnite YouTuber or something. But he would use the Pennywise form to lure the children, because children have the most active imaginations and so, make the richest meals for it. Once he has them drawn in, he brings out his pulsing eyes and razor-sharp teeth and devours them while they are most afraid. Again, much like I do when I'm devouring my tacos. That is the fate that meets young Georgie, who is the first of a whole slew of deaths and disappearances at the hand of it. Next was Betty Ripsome in December of 1957. Pennywise spoke to her through the drain in her home to make her afraid before attacking and leaving her body ripped apart near Outer Jackson Street. Don't tell me that's, whose sneaker is it? It's Betty Ripsome's. Betty's screams continued to echo through the drains and haunt her parents for the rest of this waking cycle. The next month, when school is back in session, Ben Hanscom sees the clown standing on the ice as he walks over the canal bridge, and Pennywise entices him to come down into the sewers with the prospect of balloons, the promise of never growing up, and making it seem like the sewers are basically a fun fair. A hand reaches up onto the bridge, and Ben recognizes it as the mummy from the horror movie, The Mummy, but wearing a clown suit. Ben is able to escape, but the same cannot be said for Cheryl LaMonica, who falls victim to Pennywise that April. Then, towards late April, a 3-year-old named Matthew Clements is abducted by Pennywise while riding his tricycle around the house, causing the police chief to put a curfew into effect. Before the end of that spring, Mike Hanlon rides his bike to the remains of the ironworks that exploded in 1906, where he is attacked by a giant bird, who rises out of the cellar hole and swoops in to try to pick him up. This is the same bird that his father saw after the Black Spot fire, and combines Mike's fear of birds from when he attacked in his crib as a baby, and the fear instilled the night before by the movie Rodin. Rodin's screech reminds me of the sound my 8th grade English teacher used to use if you didn't have proper MLA format. Mike is able to escape by cramming himself into the remains of the smokestack where the bird couldn't fit, and pelting it with the tiles that were laying around. Mike feels some kind of force, helping him throw the tiles harder, which I believe may have been the turtle. It was also around this time that Stan Uries had his encounter with it. He had been birdwatching in the park near the standpipe, a water reservoir that some kids had drowned in the 1930s. He hears a loud noise and realizes that a door at the base of the standpipe had been blown open. He walks over to investigate when he hears carnival music echoing through the dark. Squishy footsteps approach him. Stan calls out to ask who's there, and gets the response, the dead ones. Before he escapes, he sees the figures of the drowned kids with purple-ish black jeans and orange pom-pom buttons. Stan's friend Eddie Kaspbrak has a similar experience with it. Eddie would sometimes play around the train yard, and one day a hobo with leprosy climbs out from under the porch of an abandoned old house, number 29 Niebolt Street. Eddie is a hypochondriac, so this has a major effect on him. It uses this fact to her advantage when coming up with a form to scare Eddie. One day Eddie decides to check under the porch to make sure nobody's waiting for him there and sees it in a form similar to the hobo, but now crawling with disease and wearing the silvery clown suit. The leper introduces itself as Bob Gray, and crawls out from under the porch to chase Eddie away. Despite these 4 victims escaping, Pennywise would continue to haunt them in their dreams. One night when Eddie is going to bed, he hears the leper whisper, "It won't do any good to run." Then, at the beginning of the summer, Ben has a dream where he's playing baseball, and he hits a home run. As he's rounding the bases, he sees a clown waving to him in the trees. He doesn't remember the rest of the dream, but wakes up with a wet pillow, as if he'd been weeping through the night. It is doing everything in its power to instill fear in these members of the Losers Club who escaped on the first attempt, but what would take place that summer would take things to a level never before seen in Derry's history. Ever since the death of his younger brother Georgie, Bill Denbrough has been having a lot of disturbing thoughts. In June of 1958, Bill would go into Georgie's room to look at his photo album, and under the influence of it, Georgie's school photo winks at Bill and tells him, "See you soon." Bill drops the book and blood drips out of the pages, but Bill's parents would not be able to see the blood like the kids of Derry can. This kicks off Pennywise's busiest month yet. Another boy goes missing, this one named Edward Corcoran. Edward was fleeing his abusive father and decided to sleep in the park by the canal, where someone grabs his ankle. It takes on the form of Edward's dead brother Dorsey. When Edward ran, it took the form of the creature from the Black Lagoon. The last thing he sees is the creature's eyes going white, and a light leaking through the fins on its head. This was most likely Edward attempting to process the deadlights. Shortly after, Mike Hanlon finds Edward's knife near the spot he died. He hears a splash come from the canal, and sees something move inside of a pipe. Mike runs away, but has the feeling that someone is chasing him all the while. He would go on to share his experiences with the rest of the Losers Club, who also explain their encounters. When Bill tells the story of his encounter with Georgie's photo book, Richie Tozier says he wants to see the album as well, so Bill takes him over there, only to discover that Georgie's school photo is missing from the book. Instead, there's a photo of old Derry, somewhere near the canal, and Bill and Richie see themselves as a couple of sailors on the sidewalk. The picture begins to move, and Pennywise pops up out of the canal, but he has the face of Georgie. See? These deepfakes are getting way too good. Oh wait, wrong century. At this point, the real Bill Denbrough reaches into the photo, before Richie pulls his arm back out to safety and closes the book. Bill's hand is bleeding. This scene foreshadows the final confrontation with Pennywise. Bill and Richie have always been the ones to directly confront Pennywise. An important distinction is that they aren't the only ones to fight back, but they are the two who are willing to take the fight to its domain. This incident also marks the first time that Richie starts to realize that it is a monster with supernatural properties rather than physical ones. Bill and Richie would once again take the fight to Pennywise's domain when they decide to go to 29 Niebolt Street to investigate Eddie's story about the leper. They climb into the basement, and this time it takes the form of the teenage werewolf that Richie saw when he and a few others went to the movie theater. I feel like I would just start laughing if my worst fear just kept turning into these cheesy 50s horror movies. I can just imagine, "Oh no, please don't kill me," and then the monster turns into, like, this guy. I'd just be cracking up, but I'm sure it was pretty scary at the time. Bill brings his father's gun, but what ends up hurting Pennywise more than the gun is Richie screaming at it in his Irish cop voice and throwing sneezing powder back at it. This is because it operates on belief. Just as their fear of it makes them juicier targets, their confidence and childish humor can be used to fight back against it. By using the voice of an authority figure and attacking the werewolf with something that he believed would work, he's fighting it with the strongest weapon he has, his imagination. Imagination. As they ride away on Bill's bike, the clown comes after them, wearing the same Derry high school jacket that the werewolf had on moments before. It's not really clear in the book if he's also wearing the clown suit, or if he's just naked under the jacket. Actually, I think I'll just try not to think about that. When they look back later, Pennywise has disappeared, presumably taking refuge in a storm drain. As we get into late June, Pennywise claims a new victim, Veronica Grogan, a fourth grader at the Neibolt Church Street School. Veronica would be one of the voices that Beverly Marsh hears coming out of her drain later that week, along with the other victims like Matthew Clements and Betty Ripsum. The drain spouts blood at her, but like the blood from Georgie's album, her father is unable to see it. It tells Beverly that she'll die if she tries to fight, then the sink erupts with blood once again. The last incident of June occurs when Richie Tozier is fleeing from some bullies, and dips into the park at City Center, where there is a statue of Paul Bunyan used to commemorate Derry's beginnings as a logging town. The statue comes to life and stares Richie in the face, threatening to eat him. Moments after he runs for it, Paul Bunyan destroys the bench that Richie had just been sitting on with his giant axe. At the time, Richie chalks this up to being some kind of bizarre dream, but he would later realize this was one of the many forms of it. Not much happens in the first couple days of July, outside of Eddie Kaspbrak momentarily having a vision of a piranha wearing orange pom-pom buttons while playing in the Barrens. The slow period is likely because it is preparing to feast on a day when Derry's children would be out in droves, July 4th, also known as American Independence Day. It's kind of a shame it didn't go with Cinco de Mayo instead though, would have been perfect for this taco analogy I've got going. July 4th would be the first time Mike saw it in the form of Pennywise. He was playing in the marching band where he saw the clown handing out balloons to kids on the street. The sight of Pennywise waving at him gave him a similar feeling to the encounter with the bird. Then, later on up the hill, he saw Pennywise again, and wondered how he could have gotten there so quickly. This time, some of the kids he was handing balloons to were crying, and again, Mike got a bad feeling as he recognized the same clown from all those old photos in his father's album. It was most likely on this day that it claimed the life of young Jimmy Cullum, and the rain would push his body into the sunlight 2 days later on July 6th. He was eventually found with peck wounds all over his body, something that Mike would connect to his encounter with the bird. Jimmy would be the last random victim of it that summer. From this point on it would exclusively go after Bill Denbrough and his gang of misfits or Henry Bowers and his gang of bullies. One of the most notorious bullies in all of Derry, perhaps even more feared than Henry Bowers himself, was the 12-year-old named Patrick Hochstetter. Even a sociopath like Patrick had fears of his own for it to take advantage of though. Patrick developed a fear of leeches while visiting Brewster Lake when he was 7. During the summer when Patrick was 12, it ambushed him at the junkyard, where he would often go to deposit dogs and cats he had killed around town in a discarded refrigerator. To his shock, these leeches were also able to fly. Perhaps Patrick was so crazy that the leeches were the only semblance of a true fear that it was able to find in him, because as he was being attacked, he saw a figure standing there. It was described as having a face running like wax, as if he didn't know what he wanted to be. This is the only known instance that gives any real insight about what it might look like while cycling among forms. Patrick would eventually pass out from blood loss, only to wake up when it started devouring him. Beverly Marsh sees this incident with the leeches as it's happening, and after Patrick is taken away, she hears Pennywise's laughter reverberating from a pumping station underground. 4 hours later, she brings all of her friends to investigate, where they find a message written inside the fridge in blood reading. "Stop now, before I kill you all. A word to the wise from your friend, Pennywise." Pennywise leaves the losers a second warning, because at this point each of them had survived at least once, and the slightest hint of self-doubt begins to manifest itself within the ancient creature. This time, Mike borrows his father's Derry photo album, the one that he recognized the clown in the background of in all those old photos. They stop at the photo of the World War II parade, and like the photo that appeared in Georgie's photo album, this one starts to move as well, only this time instead of Bill reaching into the picture, Pennywise rushes up towards them and hangs on a lamppost in the foreground, threatening once again to kill them all, his nose pressing up on the plastic that the photo had been encased in. It rapidly changed forms to some of their fears: Richie's werewolf, Eddie's leper, Ben's mummy and Stan's dead boys, at which point Stan slams the album shut. That's when Bill starts to realize the truth: it is afraid of them. What Bill hasn't figured out quite yet is that it is especially afraid of the power of their unity, and that's why it's Next move comes against Eddie, while he's alone and at his weakest. On July 20, 1958, Henry Bowers and his friends chase down Eddie and break his arm. Eddie comes to during the ambulance ride and briefly sees Pennywise behind the wheel. That night, Eddie has a dream about his overprotective mother telling off his friends who come to visit him at the hospital, by telling them he doesn't want to be friends with them anymore, which parallels a conversation that happens at the same time in real life. In the dream, Pennywise is also in the hospital waiting room, wildly dancing to celebrate the breaking up of the Losers Club. The real-life version of the conversation is essentially the same, and it probably had some kind of influence over Mrs. Casbrack to encourage her to try to remove Eddie's friends from his life, and this is further suggested by the last image Eddie sees in the dream. It toggling among the many forms, the last of which has his mother's face. The incident does cause some turmoil inside the friend group, but that doesn't stop them from reuniting to take on it once again. On July 25, the 7 losers arrive at 29 Neibold. Each of them react differently to the house based on their own fears. Upon entering, they find a white clown glove. They go upstairs, where they come across a dirty magazine that winks at Ben. The hallways they traverse shrink in on them and eyes of the elves plastered on the wallpaper begin to bleed. It is doing everything it can to scare them away without having to face them directly. They come across 3 doors. The first contains a bed, which explodes and oozes out black liquid. The second sounds like it has a loud buzzing insect behind it, but turns out only to be a moose blower, which is essentially a can that lets out a constant noise as sort of an audio scarecrow for farmers. The third door is just a bathroom, but the toilet seems to have exploded, leaving white porcelain shards lying around the room. It quickly rushes up the pipe in what Ben perceives to be its own form, which we know to be the Deadlights. It explodes out of the pipe, taking the form of the werewolf and attacking Bill and Ben. Beverly fights back with the slingshot loaded with silver ball bearings, which they believe to be effective based on the werewolf movies they've seen. She hits the it on the snout with her last shot, sending blood everywhere. However, the losers are now defenseless. With no remaining ammo, Bev pulls back the slingshot again and uses her belief to try to frighten it, sending it diving back into the drain screaming, "I'll kill you all. I'll kill you all." Not much happens in the next couple weeks leading up to the big confrontation, but there is some activity from it, who is now more afraid than ever of the Losers Club and their power. It decided to bring on a new ally, one that won't be limited by the power of fear alone. So it teams up with the next biggest enemy of the losers, Henry Bowers. After losing the switchblade that Henry had attacked Ben with on the last day of school, Henry needed a new weapon. In early August, he saw some red balloons tied to his mailbox with the faces of the losers on each balloon. The balloons popped and the mailbox swung down to show him the package. It was a knife. The return address simply said, Robert Gray. After this, Henry started hearing voices from the moon, commanding him to kill his father, then telling him to get Victor and Belch to help him go after Beverly Marsh. They end up chasing the losers down into a pumping station in the Barrens, which is connected to the sewer system where it lives. Victor and Belch reluctantly go down there with Henry. I personally think that it senses their reluctance and decides to take them out, first using the form of Frankenstein's monster to decapitate Victor, then tearing Belch's face in half when he tries to fight back. Henry goes on after the losers, leaving Belch to die at the hands of it. The losers attempt to find its lair, letting Eddie lead the way with his impeccable sense of direction. They are cut off, however, by it in the form of a giant eye resembling the monster from a movie Richie had seen called The Crawling Eye. Got to admit, that one actually sounds kind of scary. Each of them is grabbed by one of the eye's 6 tentacles besides Eddie, who pretends his asthma aspirator is battery acid and sprays the eye with it to help drive it away. Next, they're attacked by the giant bird form, but Stan uses his extensive knowledge of birds to determine that it isn't a real bird, and the fact that Stan doesn't believe in it weakens the monster once more. The 7 make it to a door containing the lair of it, a cathedral-like chamber covered in spider webs. It is here that they encounter the true form of it, an endless hairy crawling form composed of light, that their human minds can only interpret as a giant spider, so that's what they all see it as, much to the dismay of television audiences of the 90s. It goes after their leader, Bill, launching him out of his physical body for a mental confrontation on what Stephen King describes as the ballroom floor of eternity. The turtle catches Bill, but tells him he takes no stand in the conflict, that Bill must fight on his own. Bill then uses his mind to engage in something known as the ritual of Chud, then cries out the line. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts, a phrase that was supposed to help him overcome his stutter. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. Bill uses his faith in all the childish things he believes in to mentally grab onto its mind and push himself back towards the real world. It screams at Bill to let go as he rejoins the circle of his friends in the real world. The spider flees into the depths of her lair, and Eddie tells them all he could hear it, and that it was dying. All they could do is hope that they had defeated the monster that haunted Derry and killed it. They make a blood pact to return to finish job if it should ever rise again. So the 1957-1958 cycle ends prematurely, with it going into an early sleep after the defeat at the hands of the Losers Club. But as always, 27 years after the awakening in 1957, it would come back with a vengeance on the people of Derry and those who had beaten it so many years before. In July of 1984, a festival is held to celebrate the anniversary of Derry's canal. At the festival, there's a little dispute between two parties. On one side are the three guys Steve Dubé, John Garden and Christopher Onwin. They were harassing a homosexual couple, Don Haggerty and Adrian Mellon. The initial dispute is broken up by police, but they have another confrontation later, where Garden and Dubé throw Mellon off of a bridge where Pennywise the clown waits below. Mellon might have survived the fall, but Pennywise drags him under the bridge and bites into his armpit with huge teeth. At this time, thousands of I Red Heart Derry balloons similar to the balloon Mellon had earlier at the Derry Canal Days Festival emerge and hit the bottom of the bridge. Mellon's body is found with stab wounds, bite marks and a missing armpit. Pennywise's return parallels many of the other tragedies occurring in Derry for the past 300+ years in one major way. The incident is largely ignored by witnesses and news outlets. However, this time there's one person taking special interest, the town librarian, Michael Hanlon, one of the losers who stayed in Derry all these years to keep an eye out for it, should the creature ever return. Mike wanted to be sure that it was back before contacting his old friends. He stood by as Pennywise claimed the life of Lisa Albrecht on October 18, then Stephen Johnson at Memorial Park near the end of the year. On February 14, 1985, two more children disappeared, Dennis Torrio and Lori Ann Winterbarger. Dennis's body was found in the Barrens with a photo of Georgie Denvro. This is the same photo that disappeared from the photo album when Bill and Richie went to look in 1958. By March, Mike is pretty convinced that it has come back, but wants to have proof before alerting the others. The bodies continue to pile up. Dawn Roy, a 13-year-old girl, is found decapitated in McCarran Park. On April 24, 16-year-old Adam Tarot is killed and mutilated by Pennywise. 2 weeks later on May 6, Pennywise emerges through the pipes as 2-year-old Frederick Cowan uses the restroom and drowns him in the toilet bowl. His mother was outside and she heard screaming, repeated flushing of the toilet and laughter that didn't sound human. When she found her son, she had to be taken to a mental hospital in Bangor. It was only 1 week after that when Jeffrey Hawley was found torn open in Bassey Park near the canal. John Fury and Jerry Bellwood, two 5th-grade classmates, were killed before the end of May. Fury was found with his legs torn off under the porch at 29 Neibolt Street and Bellwood turned up near a cement retaining wall on Kansas Street with the words, "Come home," written over and over in blood, a direct message to Mike, who would soon make the 6 phone calls to remind his friends of the promise they once made. The news was too much for Stan, who took his own life. In the meantime, it would also be calling back an old friend. Henry Bowers, who was sitting in Juniper Hill Mental Asylum, began hearing the familiar voice of Pennywise speaking to him through the moon. When the remaining losers reconvened at a Chinese restaurant upon returning to Derry, Pennywise leaves them warnings in their fortune cookies including eyes, bugs, blood and more. This is a symbolic way for it to tell them they'll meet unhappy fortunes if they try to fight. The losers go for individual walks around town while they wait for their memories of the summer of '58 to come back. During this time, Pennywise terrorizes each of them with the belief that they will not be able to win as they once did. I think the reason it becomes so confident is a combination of factors. The losers have grown up, lost their imaginations, lost one of their members, Stan, and forgotten about Derry for the most part. However, one thing that I think it didn't count on was the fact that despite them growing older, many of them still work in creative fields. Beverly designs dresses, Ben designs buildings, Richie is a radio DJ known for his creative voices and Bill is an author of fiction, a concept that those people who think Pennywise is real don't seem to understand. Each of the losers goes somewhere they used to spend time at in Derry. Ben visits the library where Pennywise taunts him from the landing. "Excuse me, sir, do you have Prince Albert in a can?" "You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out, hoo-hey. Hoo-hey, hoo-hey." I love that part. It also scared Ben using the form of Dracula and taunting him about the death of Stan. Before disappearing, it leaves behind a balloon with a message, "Have a good day, tonight you die." In the movie, Pennywise spends more time warning the losers that they should get out of town, which really I don't find to fall in line with the character so much, because in the novel it comes back and wants revenge on those who bested him, so it wouldn't really make sense for it to lure them all back there and then make them leave again. Eddie takes his walk down memory lane, not down memory lane because that probably isn't a real place, but rather, down West Broadway, where he comes upon the Tracker Bros truck depot, or at least what's left of it. This was where the kids used to play baseball. Eddie sees a leper version of Belch Huggins climb over the fence. Then the canvas squares they used to use as bases fly into the air and take after him. Tony Tracker, one of the co-owners of the depot, comes out of the ground at home plate. Eddie also sees a zombie version of his childhood crush Greta Bowie and of Patrick Hockstetter. Beverly goes back to her old apartment to see if her dad is still there, but a woman named Mrs. Kirsch has taken up the residence and invites her in for tea. Mrs. Kirsch starts rotting before her eyes, before dropping the fact that her father was Robert Gray, also known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. She also realizes that the tea she is drinking tastes like crap from the sewer, and it is at this point that Sis snapped. That meme's probably going to be so outdated by the time this video even comes out. Mrs. Kirsch turns into a witch and chases Beverly out as the whole place turns to candy like the house from Hansel and Gretel. As she runs out, she hears her father's voice call out, but when she turns back, she sees the clown holding the detached leg of a child. There's also a balloon, with the words, "It came from outer space," the name of a horror movie from the 50s that also works with the origin of it. From It, by Stephen King. While I could probably go on about how many times I've had an issue trying to distinguish the monster It from the word It, let's instead move on to Richie Tozier. Richie goes back to City Center, where the Paul Bunyan statue turns into Pennywise holding two balloons. One reading, Richie Tozier's All Dead Rock Show. Pennywise tells him that the eye is waiting for him below, a reference to the crawling eye that they encountered on their first trip into the sewers. He looks back up and the clown has been replaced by a Buddy Holly statue, and looking back on it now, it's interesting to note that Pennywise the clown looked just like Buddy Holly roughly 9 years before anyone knew who Rivers Cuomo was. Richie feels a sharp pain in his eyes, possibly a connection to the smoke in his eyes during the smoke hole ritual they did as kids. He blinks his contacts back to normal, and yes, this is me blinking for all you people who comment and say I never blink. And everything goes back to normal, but he still hears Pennywise's laughter in the back of his head. Late that night, it takes the form of Victor Criss to break Henry out of the mental asylum. Victor's body still has the voice of Pennywise though, and he explains that Henry must kill the losers because Henry can hurt them regardless of if they believe in him or fear him. In order to escape, they must first get past one of the Juniper Hill guards, John Kuntz. It first attacks him using the Pennywise form, then turns into a giant dog, which is a Doberman, just like the guard dogs at the asylum, and mauls Kuntz to death. That night, the losers reconvene at the library, where it taunts them with strange visions, including one of Stan's 11-year-old head which is stuffed with feathers, possibly a reference to the often used bird form of it. I finally made it, guys. I'm in the Deadlights now. And you know what? It's true what they say. We all float down here. And you will too. In fact, they all float. His eyes open, and they are the eyes of Pennywise. The head bursts, leaving behind a mess of blood. The losers decide to call it a night, but Henry Bowers has other ideas. Henry ambushes and attacks Mike, who is wrapping up at the library. Then, while prowling the streets at 2 a.m., he sees a sewer grate with a balloon tied to it. Don't waste your time on Henry because the voice inside his head tells him that a ride has been sent for him and a 1958 Plymouth Fury pulls up. I know this isn't an episode of Things You Missed, this is horror history, but let me give you a freebie anyways. The car matches the description of Christine from another Stephen book. Christine, the driver of the car, was a zombie version of Belch who doesn't speak the entire car ride until the end when Pennywise's voice comes out of his mouth and tells him to shut up and get the losers. I can only imagine what kind of review Henry would have left on Zombie Uber. Henry would go on into the hotel and manage to injure Eddie Kaspbrak, just as he did in 1958, but in 1985, it had one more trick up her sleeve that none of the Losers Club could have seen coming before the final showdown. Beverly Marsh never really escaped her abusive father. Yes, she did get out of Derry, and yes, that was the last time she ever spoke to her dad. But Beverly ended up falling into the same old trap again when she married a man named Tom Rogan, who treated her even worse than Al Marsh did. Tom was able to ascertain Beverly's location after she left him to reunite with her childhood friends in Derry, and he found himself waking up in a Holiday Inn in Maine where he found a balloon tied to his bathroom doorknob. The voice of it spoke to him through the balloon and told him to do its bidding. At this point, I think it's important to look back at its human servants. The fact that it is able to manipulate some people to do her bidding, but not others, is interesting to me. In fact, it seems that it is only able to manipulate people who already have a lot of evil in them. There is also a nurse that it manipulates later named Mark LaMonica, the brother of Cheryl LaMonica who was killed in 1958. It sends him with a scalpel to try to finish off Mike in the hospital, and King describes him as being an easy target for it because he's a drug addict. On the other hand, it seems like its rival, the Turtle, is able to manipulate good people. The Losers Club members often describe some kind of helping hand aiding them, like when Mike throws the tiles at the bird and he feels something helping him throw them harder than usual. Now if only we could get the Cubs bullpen could get a little help from the Turtle, then we'd really be in business. But Beverly's husband Tom isn't the only spouse who followed their partner into Derry, because Bill's wife Audra has also made the trip. In order to ensure the opportunity for revenge, it uses Tom to capture Audra and bring her into the sewers, leaving her purse at the foot of the pumping station as bait for Bill. Because of this, he, Eddie, Ben, Beverly and Richie must go face it before they are ready, and this time, they're on a rescue mission. Even with everything turned in its favor, even with only 5 losers to kill now as opposed to 7, it feels fear again as they approach, so Pennywise tries to intimidate them a little more on their drive to the Barrens. Pennywise speaks through the car radio, first reading an ad for the Richie Tozier All Dead Rock show. Then Georgie's voice berates Bill, telling him, "You let it kill me." They turn off the radio, which must have been a good indicator for it that Bill was still pretty rattled by the idea that he could have been partially responsible for what happened to Georgie. I think it's for this reason that the first form that the adult losers encounter after climbing down into the sewers is Bill's younger brother. Bill starts to feel guilt, and he feels he should have been the one to die. The others need him to come to the realization that this Georgie isn't real, and he's able to do so by repeating the phrase. He thrusts his fist against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. Just like last time, this hurts it, who retreats into the inner sanctum. You may have noticed throughout this video that I refer to it using the female pronouns. There's a reason for that, and when they get to the inner lair at the heart of the sewer system, they discover that the Deadlights they interpret as a spider has an egg sac. It's female and it's pregnant. Thought I do have serious questions about who, in their right mind, would have knocked it up. But, actually let's try not to think about that. Once again, it goes for Bill, which if you think about it makes sense. He's the leader, he's probably the biggest threat to it seeing as how he became a writer and he's still flowing with creativity and it's his wife that's been captured, so he's the most motivated. Just like when they were young, Bill leaves his physical body and enters the void. It tells him that the Turtle is dead, and won't be able to help him this time, which he doesn't believe at first, but later concludes to be true when they pass by the Turtle's empty shell. Bill tried to mentally seize its tongue like he had during the ritual of Chud when they were kids, but this time he misses his grip and drifts deeper into the void. In the physical chamber, Richie realizes something is wrong and confronts the spider using his Irish cop voice. Then Richie is whacked into the cosmic void as well, and he is able to successfully engage in the ritual of Chud. Richie takes Bill's hand and threatens to kill it if it doesn't bring them back to the real world. They almost lose their grip on it, but are able to safely get back to their physical bodies. Just before they arrive, Eddie is trying to hurt the spider with his aspirator like he did in 1958, but when it comes back to the physical body of the spider, it bites down and rips Eddie's arm off before retreating into the dark depths of the lair. This time, Richie and Bill don't want to let it get away again. Just as they pursued it to 29 Neibolt Street as kids, they follow the spider further into the dark. Beverly stops to comfort Eddie in his final moments, while Ben finds the trail of eggs left behind by it, and one by one attempts to stomp them all out. Now it was becoming more afraid than ever. It sensed Richie and Bill's pursuit. It sensed the death of its young. And it began to turn white. It turned back to Richie and Bill, now beginning to let off the deadlights within. The arachnid creature begged them to let her go, offering them power, success and the prospect of 500-year lives. Bill and Richie began to feel the power of another. Not the Turtle, but the celestial force I mentioned way back at the beginning of this video, even before I started talking about tacos, that created both of them. Bill hears the sound of the spider's heart pounding now like an enormous drum. He punches his way into it, reaches for the heart and crushes it in his hand. The creature jerked and quivered, and as it died, the light faded from it. Bill heard the voice of the other telling him, "Son, you did real good." Richie was basically passed out at this point. Ben had finished stomping over 100 eggs, and thinks he's gotten them all. Audra falls from the webbing she's strung up in and lies crumpled on the ground in a catatonic state. Eddie has died, and Beverly's pack of matches is their only source of light and hope to get out. Meanwhile, a huge storm brews above them over Derry, and the flood that would ensue is a metaphorical washing out of all the bad history the town had endured over the 300 or so years of its existence. The flood would end up destroying much of Main Street, and any buildings near the canal were swept away. The losers were able to climb directly out of the destroyed sewer pipes to the street above. As they left Derry, their memories of everything that had happened between them and it began to fade once again, but this time, even Mike, who was still recovering in the hospital, would lose his memories of the horrific occurrences that took place in and under Derry, Maine. At this point in the story, it is widely believed that the creature that had caused so much pain and taken so many lives was dead. However, some might say that simply isn't true. Stephen King would go on to write many more novels that either take place in, or reference the town of Derry, and some of them seem to imply that the battle with the Losers Club in 1985 was not the end of Pennywise. A few years pass before the events of Stephen King's 1987 book The Tommyknockers, where an alien intelligence possesses the nearby village of Haven, Maine. A 15-year-old boy named Tommy Jacklin is sent with 13-year-old Hester Brookline to retrieve as many car batteries as they could manage. During the stop in Derry, Tommy notices a clown with shiny silver dollars for eyes staring at him through an open sewer manhole. He brushes it off as an effect of the alien's mutations on his mind, but more evidence would come over a decade later in the year 2001. Dreamcatcher is another alien possession novel by Stephen King in which a character named Mr. Gray, which in itself could be a nod to the human form of it, Robert Gray, comes across the former spot of the Derry standpipe, the water storage structure that was destroyed in the flood at the end of it in 1985. There's now a memorial in its place. It reads, "To those lost in the storm, May 31, 1985, and to the children, all the children, love from Bill, Ben, Eddie, Richie, Stan, Mike. The Losers Club." But there is another message, which has been spray painted in red jagged letters over the top of the memorial, which reads, "Pennywise lives." This is pretty solid proof that Pennywise does indeed live on in Derry, because most of the town doesn't know who Pennywise is, and those who do don't have the motive to deface this memorial, like Pennywise does. But how does Pennywise live? It was pretty clear that the Deadlights faded, and its brandings disappeared from the door leading the spider's lair. Some believe that the 27-year cycle simply can't be stopped, that the Losers Club never had the ability to kill it to begin with, and that Pennywise simply went back to sleep.